You think about watershed health, what do you think about? What are the elements of it?
Well, watershed health, I think, is about the nature of the relationships between people in a place and within a place. There are a number of ways that I think different people tend to get at that. I think it's a useful idea because people are so conversant with it at least at a surface level. So like a lot of ideas that have that quality that are commonly understood, at least at a surface level, I think it often gets used without being terribly specific about what it means. I'd say within landscape architecture, the general conception is that there are a range of ways in which healthy relations between people and place get expressed. They aren't the same, for example, in an urban area that they are in a rural area, at least not completely the same. But I think they have to do with a sustenance of life processes, life-giving processes, taking actions that both acknowledge the importance and existence of those processes and making sure they continue over time. I think there's a wide array of them. But I'd say that's, in summary fashion, that's the common parlance of landscape health, watershed health.
Do you think individuals have a responsibility in maintaining the health of their watershed? Is it individual or community responsibility?
Well, I'd say both individuals and the community have a responsibility. I think one of the, back to your previous question, what within my discipline, what are the conceptions of watershed health, environmental health? I'd say the short answer is there's a moral dimension to it that has to do with maintaining the set of responsibilities we have to at least near-term future generations, if not long-term future generations. So if people take that seriously, if it's taken seriously in a community, and that means it's taken seriously by individuals for it to be taken seriously in a community, then certainly there's both a set of individual actions that are consistent with that, and then a collective set of actions that are consistent with that.
I hear a lot of people trying to talk about healthy watersheds in the services that they provide to communities or to individuals. Do you think that's a good way to increase the relationship between people and the environment?
I think it's a start. The question being about the extent to which focusing on the services that ecosystems provide to people being an adequate way to characterize the relationship. I guess an analogy in my mind is, in a marriage, if all the giving only heads in one direction, the relationship's probably not going to last very long. So in terms of helping people who might not necessarily in their prior experience have had much reason to think about the things that they get from their surroundings in a very specific way, it's a good place to start. But if it's a relationship, there has to be both give and take. There has to be an acknowledgement of the relationship, which means you appreciate what you're getting and you're cognizant and take action to attend to what you need to give.
Mm-hmm. In the work that you do with communities, do you see a recognition on their part of how they can give back?
Oh yes, certainly, and even a desire to recognize more ways in which they can give back. I think often it's a self-selecting group, the people who are choosing to spend their time working on issues of, for example, ecosystem restoration, already value that. They've already had experiences in their lives, come to understandings that lead them to give priority to those kinds of processes and then to taking actions as individuals to do something about that. So I think in that sense it can often be, there's some filtering that goes on before people show up to engage in that action, so they come already equipped and prepared to think about that. But I do think there's I think there's a hunger. There's a sense of something missing in a lot of people's lives, I think, in cultures that have, for at least the last several generations, severed a lot of relationships that people historically had with land. And I think in a lot of instances, people aren't even aware that that severing has happened. They aren't aware of what it is that they're feeling absent, but they know there's an absence. And I think that I heard someone recently characterized it as a loneliness. It's not loneliness desiring necessarily more human companionship. It's a loneliness for a set of belongings, of awareness of relationships that are not just between me and other people. It includes me and other people, but it's not just that.
Right. So it seems like those are the people that the broader audience that we need to get to start being involved in the restoration or in the assessments of our futures. It's the people that haven't self-selected to be involved. So how do we reach them?
So how do we reach the people who haven't already chosen to be involved? I think there's a range of ways. I've been alive long enough to realize that there need to be a range of ways. There's lots of people, there's lots of attitudes and ways of being in the world, and no one way is going to reach them all. Certainly the group of writers that I've spent the last couple of days with have focused a lot of attention on stories as a vehicle for doing that. And I think there are forms of stories in our culture that are very popular. I think of movies, for example, film, and what a pervasive and appreciated, I think, way of hearing stories that is in our culture. I think in many ways it takes the place of the story around the campfire of earlier in other societies. Speaking personally, one of the ways that I've certainly endeavored to engage people who aren't necessarily already self-selecting is to help be clear about how much change has happened in the places they already inhabit and probably care about, because whatever relationships they have are embedded in that place. And to help people appreciate how much change has happened, say in the last 2 or 3 human lifespans, as a way to encourage them to think about how much change could happen between now and, say, their grandkids' time, when their grandkids are adults. And I've found that to be, a way that resonates with most people. I mean, most people are, the abstraction of the future dissolves as an abstraction when it starts being about what's the world going to be like when my grandchild is an adult. It stops being abstract. So that's a way. It's not the only way by any means, but it's a way.
Right. But do you find that people are often amazed once they look at the historic condition of their watershed?
So are people surprised or amazed when they see how much change has happened in a place between some period in the past and the present? Often they're taken aback. I think it's a natural human condition to just sort of assume that the way we know the world now is the way it's always been. I think that we're wired as a species to do that. There's survival value to us evolutionarily, I think, in behaving that way. So yes, I do think people are often surprised. To me, it's not the surprise that makes that approach helpful. It's the way in which it engages them, the way in which it causes them to think and even to experience, maybe in ways that they hadn't before, about change in the place that their relationships are connected to, and to care about that, particularly into the future. Given the kinds of changes that have happened here, what would I consider to be good changes between now and when my grandkids are grown?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It seems like a very engaging process for them.
Yeah, not universally, but certainly I've found it effective, and it's one of the ways we've helped involve people who wouldn't have been involved, and to use movie-like techniques to try to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. 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 So what else would you like to tell us about watershed and community health?
I was having a conversation this morning with Fred Swanson, standing down by the creek, almost in the creek, and the question he posed to me was, where did I think the kind of exchange that we've been experiencing here between environmental writers, people whose lives are bound up in using the written word to convey their own and other people's experience with place. How do I think that kind of dialogue with that group of people and scientists should be moved forward into the future? And one reaction I had to that question is that it seems to me that the way we live in contemporary industrialized societies in general, and certainly in Western North America in particular, leads to a high degree of fragmentation in our lives. Our lives are often a series of relationships that don't connect with each other. I have my relationship with my family, I have my relationship with my work, I have my relationship with this group or that group, and the coincidence, the coming together of that set of relations, I think, has become increasingly rare for most people, the way we live. And so my response to Fred was, I couldn't give him a lot of very specific suggestions, but that it did seem to me that drawing on the project of the humanities, which I've always seen as trying to be clear about what it is that makes us human, and bringing the lessons of that endeavor to the endeavor of science, which has made the gains that it has, I think, largely because it has found advantage in approaching complexity through fragmentation. So it would be wrong-headed, it seems to me, to choose to abandon the advantage of science that's come about largely by approaching complexity a piece at a time. But in approaching life a piece at a time, it seems to me we run the risk of losing something about what it means to be human.
I see the science being more interdisciplinary and trying to take a lot of that fragmentation out, or to make a story, a more holistic story out of the science. Do you see that happening? And do you think it's a good trend?
I think one of the most significant changes I've seen in science as an activity, and especially in the United States in the last 2 decades, is exactly that it has acknowledged the limits of a reductionist focus on many of the most pressing questions of our generation. So I do think that science is choosing to become more interdisciplinary. At some point, I think it ceases to be science if it doesn't maintain its standards of verification and systematic observation, which means you can't systematically observe everything all at once. So by definition, it has to focus. It has to compartmentalize. It has to, I think, as an activity, to be science. It has to narrow its field of attention within a given scientific endeavor. Now, science as a whole, you could certainly argue, is trying to observe the whole. But when I think about individual scientists, the best ones that I've had the fortune to work with, they have to bound what they're attending to get a deeper understanding. And then they aim to link that deeper understanding of some bounded process to deeper understandings of other bounded processes. So I think by definition it has to be a partial view, and I think that's different than the humanistic project. I think those are, they really do have, I think, different ways of going about their work. I think in the long run, maybe if you imagine what they're really after ultimately, I'm not so sure what they're after is different, but I think they really do have different ways of conducting themselves as endeavors.
Mm-hmm.